Welcome to Austen Mondays, everyone. I'm your host, Edward G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, we are going on a biblio-venture with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In each episode, I talk with a special guest, a brilliant Austen scholar, creator, or Janeite, about Austen and her works. And then I have an hour-long conversational annotation with a chapter co-host in which we illuminate, elucidate, explicate a few chapters of Pride and Prejudice. And our special guest today is Elizabeth Steele. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you.
It is great to have you here. I'm looking forward to talking to you. You can point out the things in your room there around you as well. But more with Elizabeth in a moment, everyone. Stay tuned for our chapter annotation segment when Dr. Kathleen Hudson will join me to talk about chapters 32 to 34, or volume 2, chapters 9 to 11, if that is the way your book is designed. We're calling it Darcy Loves Lizzy. And if you're watching live on YouTube, of course you're watching live on YouTube. That's where we're streaming this. But if you're also watching the recording, thanks for watching. I invite you to please go down, like the video, like each video. Also subscribe to the channel. Doing that gives our show greater visibility and leads us to more people discovering Austen Mondays. But for now, let's take a turn about the room. Elizabeth Steele has been reading anything by or about Jane Austen since the age of 16. She has been the voice of Jasna, acting as the Jane Austen Society of North America's 800 number operator, and has been a featured speaker at local colleges, libraries, and museums, most notably at Winterthur Museum's Jane Austen Day. She has published 2 articles in Persuasions. She served on the Jasna Board of Directors from 2006 to 2016 and has held a number of offices for both the local and national organizations since 2004. And Elizabeth is most proud, she tells me, of her role as coordinator for the annual general meeting for Jasna's 2009 meeting in Philadelphia, which played host to over 600 guests from all over the world. Elizabeth, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. And I know you've been watching the show, and
I have.
So that's gratifying to me when somebody like you was paying attention to the show and sent me an email early on.
Yeah, I did. I can't remember how it popped up, but I think I spotted this in August. And of course, I immediately signed up. It's my favorite Austen novel, so I couldn't miss it.
Good. Well, you're going to talk to us today about what we have termed one Janeite's journey, which I love. But let's start that off with, do you have an Austen or Pride and Prejudice discovery moment in your life?
I have an Austen moment, which happens to be the same as a Pride and Prejudice moment. Mm-hmm. I was a senior in high school, so I was just starting off, the tender age of 16, and Mrs. Muldoon, who was quite stern but loved by everyone, gave us a supplemental reading list. So Pride and Prejudice was not something we studied in class, but it was something that we had to read in order to be, as she would say, educated, dear hearts. And so I read everything on the list but Pride and Prejudice, Ed, because I was convinced that it just sounded not as much fun as anything else. So sadly, I read Hard Times before I read Pride and Prejudice.
Going from Mr. Grad Grind to this novel, a different experience.
Exactly. So I read Pride and Prejudice last, and I thought, this is the greatest book in the world. I'm a 16-year-old kid, still chafing under parents' guard. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you can't get a better father than Mr. Bennet. And Mrs. Bennet is, just nagging me to get my homework done. So I thought, this is wonderful. I don't know who this person is, but I think I'm going to read Sense and Sensibility next. Mm-hmm. And that was not on the required reading list. So Jane Austen got me immediately.
And you started reading them all from then on? Did you go from one to the other, or did it take time? Are you interrupted by other readings? Or?
Well, a lot of reading senior year, a lot of reading as an English major all 4 years. So by the time I had graduated, I had read them all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just reread them. I'm old. So there are no movies, there are no TV shows. The only Jane Austen experience you can have is to read the books over and over again. So by the time I learned that there was a Jane Austen Society, and I learned that in 1983, I had just read the books over and over again. And sadly, I left my newspaper on the train, as all of us train commuters used to do, leave the paper for the next person.
I left the hat on the train the other week. I had to buy a new one. So
I'm sure it's at the SEPTA Lost and Found. So that was my experience. So if I had a Jane Austen desire, but I didn't have any time but maybe 15 minutes, I would just take the book down and read a few chapters.
Yeah.
And now you get to watch a whole movie.
Yeah. Or a long TV series.
Or a long TV series.
Of which existed at the time, but it wasn't really until, especially in America, but it wasn't really until Masterpiece Theater started, broadcasting the British TV in America, that they became readily available here. And then the VCR age comes in. But did you first see the 1980 Pride and Prejudice on Masterpiece Theater?
On PBS.
Yeah.
And, I did not answer the phone. Nothing happened until it was over. And then I mentioned that another woman at work and I loved Pride and Prejudice, and we would talk about it Monday morning. Mm-hmm. That was pretty much it in terms of what you could do with Jane Austen at that time for me.
Yeah, there was nothing available. Films and TV. There was the old Olivier, Greer Garson film. That's it.
Which I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen it.
Because now the video age comes in the 80s, and you can start getting these things.
Do you remember Bernie Herman?
Bernie Herman? You mean
Bernie Herman was in the Philadelphia area, and he ran and then reran what he called classic movies.
No, I don't remember.
So you would see it over and over and over again for a week.
Okay, yeah.
And it wasn't even on Bernie's show. So, just never saw it. And so when, I guess it was 1995, really when Jane Austen took off, thanks to Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely, that was when I could indulge my habit, and I could buy Jane Austen bandages. I could buy a Pride and Prejudice glass, a Darcy Christmas ornament. And believe me, anytime I saw anything Jane Austen or Pride and Prejudice related, I bought it. My fingers pointing to the glow in the dark Jane Austen switch plate. It's so old, it no longer glows in the dark. But when it did glow in the dark, it was awesome. The Jane Austen doll, my fingers pointed that. And of course, then I have your candle.
Yeah, I have that too.
And the whole room, my whole office has Jane Austen everywhere.
And you also have quite a Pride and Prejudice collection. Is that the book? Do you buy all of Austen's books, or can you pass up a Jane Austen? Can you pass up a Pride and Prejudice edition?
I can't pass up a Pride and Prejudice edition. No. I have Pride and Prejudice editions that I don't even like.
And you have a favorite. Let me share a picture of it here. You have a favorite edition.
This is my favorite. $20 whole.
There it is. This is Bestseller Live. What publisher is this? British? Well, it is. I see.
Yes.
6 up there. Yeah.
Bestseller Library. And Janine Barkis had showed this in her breakout session at the 2012 Jasna AGM. And when I saw it, I knew I had to have it because it was so cheesy and wonderfully cheesy. I just knew it would be mine. And it took years to track it down.
And I like the kind of, the very subtle erotic touch of this in her positioning to him, but also, as you can see on the in between there, is that a riding crop? No, I guess it's a little cane, but it's still, it has that. Yeah, there's something very risque about this picture without automatically saying like this is risque. It's just all kind of hinted at behind the scenes, in a sense, I think, much like the novel.
It's like a Barbara Cartland cover.
Yeah.
And the whole thing seemed so funny to me that I loved it. But yes, at first I thought it was a riding crop too. But then I realized he probably wouldn't have been riding. Although now I realize he has his boots on, which probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah. So.
Which is odd.
There you go.
So I bought them. My next journey was to buy everything I could find because I was convinced they would stop selling Jane Austen things any moment. That, of course, never happened. And so I wound up with piles of inappropriate things. And then I finally found Jasna, and that was 1996. And that was when they created their first website. And it was really just a giant internet poster.
Yeah.
Which, gave the number and the history of the organization. So I immediately joined. And when you join at the end of a year, they automatically throw you into the next year. Well, when I joined, that was how it worked. And so officially I became a member in 97.
Yeah, that was a real, confluence of things happening, not just all the movies that had come out in 95 and the TV in 96, but then also it's the dawn of the internet, so that people can find them and not have to know somebody and write a letter and that kind of thing. So
yes.
And Jazz.
So that was it. I knew that the Jane Austen Society of North America existed, but I didn't know how to get in touch with them. It never occurred to me to go to a reference librarian and ask for the association, the directory of associations. And there you would have found them, but I had no idea that's what I should have done.
Now, how did you become the voice of the 800 number operator?
That was the most fun job ever.
Now, I'm assuming that doesn't exist anymore, right?
Oh, it does.
It does. So you could still,
yes.
Still an 800 number for jazz.
No, I'm not doing it any longer. Kimberly Brangwyn Millam is doing it, but and of course a jazz member. But I did it for about 10 years, I think.
Now, did people call just for info about Jasna, or did they call with like a Pride and Prejudice question or a novel question?
Generally they would call and ask about the AGM, or they would call and ask, is my membership renewable? Did I send my dues in? I can't remember. But every once in a while, you would get these great questions. One of my favorites was a woman who called. She was coming to her first AGM, and she had been told she had to buy a costume for the Regency Ball after the banquet, which you do not have to do. But she had bought her gown, and then she wanted to know if we would be supplying her with a dance partner. And I just loved that question. Yeah. I said, well, thank you, but we're not Mrs. Bennet. We're just
well, especially in light of the novel, when there were ladies in want of partners. I forgot to get the exact line, So.
Exactly. That was great. A first-year teacher at a private girls' school called, and she wanted to know, was it okay for her to compare Lydia, Jane, and Elizabeth to Freud's ego, superego, and id? And I said, oh, I love that. Yeah. By all means, do that.
She needed
So
permission for that, huh?
she just wanted to check.
Yeah.
So there were some really great questions. Oh, and then I also got emails that I would answer. And somebody called and wanted to know why we were so partial to Jane Austen and how we could forget about poor Charlotte Bronte. That was another good one. Although we pay for those 800 number calls. So we were paying for Charlotte Bronte.
There you go.
And then, of course,
Charlotte. Jane Eyre's never going to be forgotten.
And then I was lucky enough to correspond with Adrian Lucas, who played Wickham in the Colin Firth version. Yeah. So I had a lot of fun doing the 800 number stuff. It was great.
He called the number then? He
didn't call the number. He was just corresponding, but he could have.
Okay.
I would have called him back.
Yeah.
That would have been fun to talk with him. And I think that job came after I was regional coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
So first, I became regional coordinator for Eastern Pennsylvania region.
Mm-hmm.
And just because Liz Philosophus Cooper just retired as JASNA president, I'll just put in what she likes to say. The chapters are in Jane Austen's novel, but we have regions.
I was trying to place her name the other day. That name, she just friended me, and I was like,
"Did she?"
And I was like, "This name is so familiar," and I couldn't put it together. So thanks for putting it. Yeah, that's who it is that just friended me, and I said yes. Of course, I confirmed. Of course,
right she's away. Great, and she came. She came to JASNA through her mother, who was a devoted Jane Austen reader, and really was instrumental in helping to found JASNA and get it off the ground.
Do you find that happens a lot in JASNA? Is it a generational organization?
It can be, but it's really a word of mouth organization.
Now it's spread more. Yeah.
Yes. But, mothers and daughters don't always share the same interests. So we don't always have a lot of mothers and daughters, although we have some.
Mm-hmm.
And I know quite a few, but I think that's just because I've been in JASNA for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And because I volunteer a lot. And so after regional, after regional coordinator, it was AGM coordinator. And after AGM coordinator, it was vice president for conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of all that was the 800 number operator.
But you put together the first, you coordinated the first, the conference that happened in Philadelphia.
The 2009 conference, because the first one was in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great conference. I wasn't there, of course, but I hear it was great.
And it's grown so big. And what was the Philadelphia one? What was the theme, or what was the book for that one?
It was the sesquicentennial of the publication of Emma.
Okay.
Which is perfect for Philadelphia, since Philadelphia was the publishing capital of the world at the time Jane Austen was alive.
Yeah.
And thanks to pretty lax copyright laws, it was Carey and Lee, the publishers that were at around 4th Street, 4th and something. It goes out of my mind right now, but they published Emma in 1816.
Yeah, that's the first Austen published in America, was that Philadelphia
edition
of Emma.
And so they thought that would be a perfect theme. In 2009, we knew that all the bicentenary celebrations were coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So we picked a non-book theme, and our theme was Jane Austen's brothers and sisters in the city of brotherly love.
There you go. And she has an aunt Philadelphia as well.
That's exactly right.
Her aunt is named Philadelphia. So
Yes, and Aunt Philadelphia went on the fishing fleet to find herself a husband.
To India, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, there was a portrait of her with Betsy, as Eliza was called at the time, and Tyso, Saul Hancock, or is it Saul Tyso? I can't recall. And it was on Facebook. Some historical society had just plucked it out of the air to use. And that kind of made me chuckle.
Mhm.
So from there, where did I go? So from there, I went to really paying attention at AGMs. So instead of acquiring things, I started to acquire knowledge. And that was certainly the better of the two options, because I feel like I know much more about Jane Austen than I did in 1997 when I first joined. In fact, I wouldn't even go to a meeting until I had finished my first biography.
As someone as someone who reads Austen frequently, let me ask you, and obviously you're still reading for pleasure, I hope, like that still happens.
Absolutely.
But what happens in the process of you reading? Like, how do you read Austen now? What happens when you read?
It's such, well, it's like that old Hollywood song, stereophonic sound. It's everything now. Because I don't know if you remember, but I told you that after a point, I had decided, gee, I really need to read these novels critically. And so I decided to read everything in the order in which she wrote it and to make notes. And then I got a little carried away and I started looking up every word that I didn't know exactly. So, for example, since we're talking about Pride and Prejudice, when I got to the part about the shoe roses, I knew what was meant by a shoe rose. Gosh, we had them when I was in junior high. I think they might even have them now. I don't know. And I decided I should look it up. What was a shoe rose in the Regency? And then I went from there to learning about the slippers themselves and shoes and how they didn't have a left and a right foot unless you were particularly wealthy. They had something called straights.
Wow.
I thought, wow, that can't be fun.
Yeah. You said both shoes were just the same. Oh.
Yes. And if you look at a lot of pictures and look at, if you're ever in a museum where they have Regency period slippers, you'll see that there isn't a left and right. They just both look the same. So I guess if you had feet that looked straight, then they were fine for you. So I went wild with this thing and I sort of annotated. This is before good annotated versions, editions were out there.
Yeah.
Now my favorite,
the Harvard one, the David Shepard one.
I love the Harvard one.
Yeah.
I think the Harvard ones are the best, but maybe it's just because they're the best for me.
I like the Harvard ones, not just for all the information, but also for the critical take and lots of interesting things about the whys of it. But that David Shepard one, I can't remember the publisher, is just great for all the little historical details about things like shoe roses and all kinds of things all throughout it. I find that one endlessly fascinating. I love going down those rabbit holes of what something is, and then it leads me to look up something else. So,
well, that was it. I went down these rabbit holes myself. And here's the problem. Well, for me, again, when I was doing this, the internet was not awash in Jane Austen websites or blogs. So I couldn't go too far off the mark. But I did find out that gruel is varied. You can have a celebratory bowl of gruel where you put alcohol in it. And I remember being so excited about this discovery that I emailed my friend Jan Fergus, who taught Austen at Lehigh. And I said, this is great. Now we know why Mr. Woodhouse was pretty quiet and sat by himself. And she said, no, 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 no.
His gruel was not that celebratory.
No. She said, this is Jane Austen's Mr. Woodhouse. This isn't some blog site's Woodhouse. And so I learned from that I needed to be careful. And she was great in teaching me that.
The cheapest gruel would have been Scrooge's gruel that he eats at night. So cheapest ingredients, thinnest, I'm sure. Nobody would eat that except him. So.
And then from there,
it sounds like it's interesting because it sounds like when you read, you don't just read it, you have all these echoes of all other things that must come in, and so it's almost like it must be like an immersive experience when you read, to have all of these little things come out.
It was after that. I read history books. I mean, I went berserk. Because number one, my job was, I was a systems analyst. It's just not a whole lot of fun on a daily basis. So my fun was digging into Jane Austen. And on 2000, I begged my husband to go to Boston to go to the first AGM because it was going to be Pride and Prejudice. And for anybody who knows me, they know I've been to every single AGM since 2004. And I said to Andy, I'll never go to another if we can just go to this one. And so, of course, I learned there from Dr. Ruth Perry, who was one of the plenary speakers, how to be a much better reader of Jane Austen.
Mm-hmm.
So now I've gone from collecting gewgaws to actually studying. And what Ruth did say to me later, that she regretted the title, but it's a catchy title and it makes you want to read her essay. And the essay is on jazza.org in the persuasion section, so anybody can find it. And it's called Sleeping with Mr. Collins. And she implored us to stop reading things as 21st century readers. Understand exactly what the strictures are for women in that time period. You might not marry Mr. Collins, but you're thinking as a 21st century woman. So, because Charlotte's marriage has come up a few times, I was hoping you would indulge me and let me weigh in on it.
Go ahead. We'll do that and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Claudia Johnson taught me this. Go to the text. Any discussion, go to the text. And so at volume 1, chapter 22, Charlotte herself was tolerably composed and had time to consider of it. Mr. Collins, to be sure, was neither sensible nor agreeable. His society irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary. But still, he would be her husband. And then it skips to her, I'm just bypassing a whole lot of information. And she's talking to Lizzy, who has said, I can't believe you're going to marry this buffoon. I am not romantic, you know. I never was. Mm-hmm. I ask only a comfortable home. And considering Mr. Collins' character connections and situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state. Mm-hmm. She doesn't care. Her entire goal was to get a house of her own, and she got it.
Yeah.
So, and then the other one, I'll put these links to things on the website. Because there's an essay about the first sentence. And not one of my favorite annotated books has ever
Yeah.
referred to that.
About that whole 18th century. I love that. Absolutely love it. Yeah. Put a link that put a link in the chat to tonight's show, or even in the comments underneath, actually would be
Okay.
more visible for people to see. And that would be great. So Elizabeth,
So that's my journey.
Well, yeah, it was a brief little bit of your journey, because you have had a great journey through Jane Austen over the years. So I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future.
That'll be fun.
Definitely in person about this in time to come. So
yes, because we met through Pride and Prejudice.
We did at the Philadelphia, at the Eastern region.
10 years ago. No, 10 years ago at the Philadelphia Free Library celebration.
Oh yeah, that's right, at the Free Library. Before I was even at the Rosenbach. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for reminding me. Wonderful. Well, thank you for taking a turn about the room with us today.
Thank you for asking.
And a real pleasure. And I will see you soon, I hope. All right, Elizabeth?
I hope so. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ed. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Everyone, we will be off next week. There'll be no show on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, when the next Monday is. Our next show will be January 2, and our Turnabout the Room guest will be Goucher College professor Julia Wells, author of Reading Jane Austen in America, a book I like very much, and the forthcoming 2023 book next year called A New Jane Austen: How Americans Brought Us the World's Greatest Novelist. I saw a presentation of her doing that, and it's quite fascinating. So join us on January 2nd for the next Austen Mondays, and when Juliet Wells will be our guest. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. It's a nonprofit organization. The Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. If you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Rosenbach membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn about how to become a member on our website. Lots of people all over the world have joined up as Rosenbach members to help support us. And a Rosenbach membership makes a great gift too. So let's remind you. Lots of great in-person virtual programs and courses at the Rosenbach coming up. Our new winter program and course schedule is now available on our website for everyone to register. And you can find out more about those things there. And Austen Mondays merchandise is still available. We have t-shirts, stickers, and buttons. You can visit the Rosenbach's website to buy those as well. You can also join us on the Facebook group page for Austen Mondays for lots more info, news, links, conversations, and fun. And for today's chapter annotation segment, I want to welcome back my co-host, Kathleen Hudson. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello. How are we doing?
We have an exciting one today, you and I.
I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased. I've got my drink. I've got my book. It's dark out. It's cold. It's perfect
Good.
Reading weather.
It's just like hitting the jackpot to talk
It is.
about.
It's great. I love it.
Chapters. So.
Love it.
All righty. Well, I also want to give a shout out to my daughter, Lulu, who I know is watching right now. Lulu created the opening and credit sequences for us, and she's also a fine writer, but I'm giving her a shout out because she just got accepted to attend Princeton University next year, and we are all so proud of her. She'll be up there studying with Claudia Johnson, hopefully.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
I got an English major in the Pettit clan after me, so that's great.
Very cool.
Well, before we go into the chapter, let me mention what I am drinking first in our Drinking with Jane and Ed segment. And tonight's drink is what I'm calling hold on a second. There we go. What I'm drinking is I'm calling it the Brandy Elizabeth. It's a Brandy Alexander, basically.
Yeah.
I add a little vanilla extract in it. I always think that's good. That brings out the crème de cacao.
Yeah.
Vanilla flavoring in that, which is, I mean, it's a chocolate flavored liqueur, but I should have mentioned, actually, Elizabeth Steele was just drinking one too, but she had Lady Godiva liqueur in it.
That's, yeah.
Which works. Absolutely.
It's definitely a chocolate kind of series of chapters for sure. We need all the chocolate we can get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Chocolate is a good thing to have in times when you need some.
Yeah, when you have now gotten 2 of the worst proposals.
When we hit this, we're not only going to talk about it, but we're going to have to rank them, because
we are.
Before the show started, we'll see us in the chat.
This.
Some people are like, no, Mr. Collins was still worse. And I'm like,
yeah, I have thoughts on the ranking system here. So yeah, that's great.
So we will do that today. And so
Side for once and all.
Yeah, so let us begin here, and this is chapters 32 to 34. I'm calling it Darcy Loves Lizzy, as he would have perhaps written on his little school notebook. A little heart there.
It certainly didn't come across too much in his proposal, but yes,
he didn't, but he's feeling it. And and it's chapters 32 to 34. If you have an edition that doesn't do those continuous chapter divisions, it's volume 2, chapters 9 to 11. And let us get right into it. Darcy plays, it's 32. Elizabeth was sitting by herself the next morning writing to Jane when Mrs. Collins and Maria were going on business to the village, when she was startled by a ring at the door, the certain signal of a visitor. And to her very great surprise, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Darcy only entered the room. This is unusual.
I always thought this was a really strange incident. When the first couple times I read this, I was always very much why would you include this very awkward conversation? Mm-hmm. Why not jump, further into it? It seems like a very pointed, again, really mix of things where it's 2 people very much talking across purposes. And my whole thing that I've sort of found rereading it is Darcy thinks he's in a different storyline than Elizabeth clearly does. At no point did it occur to Elizabeth, but he's clearly already gotten married in his head. And this is just, he has skipped, I think, mentally several steps here, and he thinks he's communicating to Elizabeth the way a human being communicates to another human being, having forgotten that you actually have to articulate some of these things before the other person understands it. So,
and he hasn't broken in on her here, like thinking like she's alone, I can go talk to her. It's just he's astonished that she's alone. He really thought the other ladies would be there, but he's still coming by himself. And
social awkwardness, the musical.
And he just kind of stands there. They sit, and he just doesn't say anything. And then she starts up with the questions to kind of,
nudge him,
prod him again on the whole Bingley in London too. She starts asking. So you all quitted Netherfield last November, and I hope that Bingley and his sisters are well when you left them in London. I'm sure she says
London.
And
and he just doesn't. It is like talking to a brick wall a little bit, because he just will not pick up the thread until he's forced to do so. I do think she's making a very good point though here, which is I think maybe Lauren said this at one point in an earlier episode, that when a family takes a house in a neighborhood, and especially someone who has an estate like Netherfield, that's really important for the neighborhood. So when she makes that kind of point of that there is a responsibility there, that sort of does harken back to earlier chapters where we're talking about how Bingley isn't that good at having a library. Bingley isn't that conscious of his role within the community necessarily, and that there is this kind of responsibility that landed peoples owe to the people who are on the land and the surrounding town. So that she's drawing that out and make it, I think, is very pointed. Certainly.
Yeah.
That, he should give up the place entirely. It would be better for the neighborhood.
Yeah. And then Darcy confirms that, and he's like, yeah, he probably will give it up.
Which is not the answer she was looking for, but sure.
And and then he's again, I interesting, like you talk about, he doesn't consider how she feels about this.
No.
And this all play into later why I do think this is the worst proposal, even more worse than Collins. But like, he really should catch a clue here that I'm supposed to maybe consider your feelings before I say things like, oh yeah, I'll probably just dump the house.
Do you think he's being disingenuous, or do you think he genuinely is just like not picking up that would be important to Elizabeth because it's important to Jane? That's something I always thought was a bit, because he obviously knows what he has done in terms of Bingley and Jane's relationship, so that he would not. He doesn't seem to make the connection that Elizabeth is Jane's sister, so of course she would care. And clearly Mrs. Bennet has made it an obvious point that this is an issue in the family, that Jane should marry Bingley. So I'm curious on your opinion of, is he being a little bit deliberately ignoring that, or does he genuinely not pick up on that?
I don't think he does, because I take him at his word in his letter. Yeah. And I think that he didn't, and we'll hit this later, he didn't really think that was that big a deal to Jane. Right. But also, the more important thing is, I still think he's just far too self-centered. He doesn't consider how Elizabeth would feel about this. True. He is very much still in his own head. And in a sense, in one way, he's no different than Mr. Collins in how completely he only considers himself in this whole endeavor. And which is something that she will teach him that you're not supposed to do.
No, that I very much agree, is that in many ways, upsetting ways, the proposals are almost identical because they're coming from that place. Yeah.
So because of that, I think that he's not being disingenuous. He just doesn't think of it. That's just not. Why would he consider that?
Saying that he's deliberately misdirecting the conversation is giving him a little bit too much credit.
Yeah. And then and now he's, just kind of make small talk. Oh, it's a comfortable house.
Although he does have marriage on the brain, clearly, because he is very focused on the Collinses.
Mr. Collins appears very fortunate in his choice of a wife. What do you think of that? Like, he's asking her a particular question about marriage. And and to frame it like that it's Mr. Collins who is fortunate, especially coming after, because we've been talking for now several episodes about Charlotte's choice to marry Mr. Collins when she does not, it's not a grand passion, and that she is doing it for security and practical concerns rather than explicitly romantic ones, which Elizabeth, to her credit, does acknowledge the nuance of that. My friend has an excellent understanding, though I'm not certain I consider her marrying Mr. Collins the wisest thing she ever did, but in a prudential light, it is certainly a very good match for her. So it's interesting that she's making that. What does he hear? What does he hear when she says that?
I think he hears the a prudential light. It's interesting to me that she makes that nuance between prudence and wisdom in that. I think that's a very didactically interesting it may be the prudent thing to do to marry for security, but it may not be the wisest thing to do in terms of maintenance of self, but yes, his next thing is, it must be very agreeable to her to be settled, close to her family and friends. So he's clearly seeing that as, oh yeah, she's with me on this marriage. That's the way.
Yeah. And Elizabeth notes right away that, like, are you kidding me?
It's 50 miles.
It's short if you're a rich gentleman. I can go wherever you want, whenever you want. But it's not. So while he's saying, oh, okay, so this is something that could happen, I think in his head, because he's not asking her about Charlotte and Mr. Collins. He's asking her about what she thinks about being married to someone, and could she do it? Is it only because it's close to home? Would she consider being farther away from her family? Because that's what he wants to know. He wants her to be far away from her family.
Yeah, and even when she says that, no, it's not close, he doesn't seem to take her at her word, and he almost does seem, I think this is a rather almost kind of mean response of, that's proof of your own attachment to Hertfordshire. Anything beyond the very neighborhood of Longbourn, I suppose, would appear far. Now, of course, this is a very Austen thing where it's Elizabeth fancied she understood, kind of suggesting that she's not actually understanding. But I think even if she's not taking that, I mean, she takes it as a comment on Jane and Netherfield. But I think even without that, he seems to be suggesting that she has a limited scope, and maybe if she was outside that scope, it would be different. So that he's trying to make this narrative fit what he wants it to say, and he's not really hearing her.
Well, he's asking her like, oh, but would you think if you were far away? Meaning, I'm thinking of asking you to marry me, and I want to know if you're going to say like, no, I need to live near home, and which you couldn't do. But as he spoke, there was a sort of smile, and I love that, if only because. And we mentioned this in an episode or two ago, like he smiles a lot.
Yes.
For being Mr. Haughty, he smile. If you search smile, just that word in the text, Darcy has smiled 6 or 7 times so far.
And he has, I think, very, very varied smiles. Like this is a sort of a smile.
It is.
And there are smiles that are often misread. That she thinks he's being mocking, or she thinks he's being this, that, or the other, but yet that they are smiles, and that he does seem to be, I mean, in a way, I think, again, this is one of those great things about Darcy and Elizabeth as a pair, is I always got the impression that their sense of humor is very similar. But Elizabeth says it out loud, whereas Darcy is kind of, I think, having a running commentary in his head that is very similar to what Elizabeth's is. Yes. But and then I love too that Elizabeth, in trying to cover herself, then says pretty much exactly what he wants to hear by accident. That well, you don't want to be settled too near your family, far and near a relative. So she's trying to cover herself, and he's just jumping on that, like, yes, you don't want to be too close to Longbourn, do you? And again, it is fascinating because I do think, I mean, it's something I said, I think for one of the earlier chapters, is no one communicates the way those two communicate. And one of the really striking things about their first interactions are that they're really the two who are talking to each other as equals. Caroline Bingley is not talking to Darcy as an equal. She's just trying to get his attention, and it's clearly unbalanced. And even Bingley too. She doesn't think
she's equal to him. She thinks he is above her, and she's trying to get his attention so she could also be above everyone else.
Yeah. And even, I mean, Darcy's even talking to Bingley at that thing. And again, you still aren't getting the sense that they're a meeting of the minds, but even when they are ostensibly arguing, Darcy and Elizabeth are speaking to each other as equals, which is why I think this is when it starts to get really tricky, because they are still talking to each other as equals, but they are talking at cross purposes.
Yeah.
Darcy's asking questions that Elizabeth isn't picking up on and doesn't understand, because Elizabeth is assuming that Darcy feels about her the way she thinks she feels about him, that there's no affection there, that they're adversaries, and that's that. Whereas Darcy, again, has already gotten married in his head. He's honeymooning. He's 10,000 miles away from this drawing room in Aruba. So,
and in this particular question, he's asking her how much she's attached to being with her crass family in Longbourn, or is she okay with leaving them all and coming and living far away from there? And thus, if she is, then that's like, okay, then I can ask her, because he's
Yeah.
trying to feel out, he's trying to make sure that everything is going to go right with this.
Yeah.
Because
And I love that
conflicted.
you cannot have a right to such local attachment. You cannot always, again, he's not asking, he's trying to make this all fit. And I'm like, no, you gotta ask.
Because she's been to London a little. She's been to London with her aunt. It says like she's frequently gone with her aunt to London and all, but she still hasn't, she's not like a worldly person like he is. And
no.
So he knows that. And,
Yeah.
But he wants her to just leave this place behind. But,
because of course, as we'll find out, to him, her family is a not insignificant issue here.
And then he sits down and picks up a newspaper.
Yeah. In a colder voice, are you pleased with Kent? And they say romance is dead. Are you pleased with Kent?
What are you doing? You are the most awkward, ever.
Again, you can understand why in adaptations they cast him as having massive social awkwardness, because it's moments like this where you're like, this isn't normal. You can't be like this normally, right?
Yeah, and the 95 Colin Firth plays this really well. Like he understands how to do haughty and awkward, and he does it exceptionally well.
So that they're basically the same thing.
Of course, the king of awkward is Hugh Grant, and he would, and then he's in the other.
Poor, painful. Yeah.
He's in Bridget Jones's Diary. And
yes. Yeah. I'll never get over. I mean, he was the king of awkward in Sense and Sensibility.
He's the king of awkward in that, and he does that very well. But it's that awkward because I'm very interested in you, so I don't know how to behave. But in this novel, it's more, as Darcy pleads in the previous chapters, he just doesn't know how to behave in general. Like he's, and that's his, as he said, that's his issue. Of course, Elizabeth's like, well, that's because, and
you don't practice.
Colonel Fitzwilliam is like, that's because you don't try. And Elizabeth is like, he doesn't try. So
yeah. And also too, again, it's all about reading. So many of Austen's works are, she is a writer who is a reader, and her characters are characters who read. And obviously Elizabeth is reading this one way. And I love that when Charlotte comes in, her first response is, that's weird. He must be in love with you. Like, just like that. I'm like, God, best friend forever. Just, you know.
Yep.
He must be in love with you.
He must be in love with you. He would never, go ahead. I'm sorry. What did she say?
Or he would never have called on us in this familiar way. Just, she's right.
That sets Charlotte on this. She's trying to figure out, like, wait a minute, like, is he really interested? Like, is he really interested? So she observes him. She observes both Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam's, coming to the house. And
I like that Colonel Fitzwilliam's occasionally laughing at his stupidity proved that he was generally different. So that this is maybe that he would not necessarily be so awkward if it wasn't that the people he's trying to impress are so thoroughly unimpressed with him.
Charlotte in the end just knows not what to make of him. Like, she can't figure it out because Darcy is so awkward. She can't quite figure it out. And she would like to have believed this change, the effect of love, the object of her love, of that love, her friend Eliza, but she winds up just being stymied by it. Like, she can't get him. And Elizabeth's attitude too. Wait, she says at one point, he certainly looked at her friend a great deal, but the expression of that look was disputable. It was an earnest, steadfast gaze, but she often doubted whether there were much admiration in it, and sometimes it seemed nothing but absence of mind.
The 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah. And of course, Elizabeth doesn't seem to like him at all, or at least protests that she doesn't. So,
and I think it speaks again very much to Charlotte's, I wouldn't call it cynicism, but I think she takes a slightly, unromantic view. In her opinion, it admitted not of a doubt that all her friends' dislike would vanish if she could suppose him to be in her power. I found that very interesting, that she's like, but if Elizabeth thought that she actually had this guy, she changed her tune, which she's maybe a little, right? But also seems like very cynical.
That's what Charlotte would do.
Yeah.
That is not what Elizabeth would do. And I find that interesting that just as much as Elizabeth didn't understand Charlotte, I don't think Charlotte really understands Elizabeth. Elizabeth would never, like, if she realized that Darcy liked her, she would do everything she could to not spend any time with him, because she wouldn't want him to continue that, because she can't admit that she likes him. I mean, I think she does behind the scenes, but because it's not conscious to her, she wouldn't pursue that. Yeah. She's not like Charlotte at all.
Yeah, it is interesting that as two women friends, very good friends, they're coming at from a completely different angle.
I mean, well, it's a reminder too, to the reader too, that these two, they can love each other and be great friends, Charlotte and Elizabeth, but they do not think the same about being married. And it's not just cultural conditions. It's not just the fact that Charlotte's older and doesn't have the prospects that Elizabeth would have. They just don't think the same about being married.
And I do think Charlotte is subtly articulating, again, a kind of vaguely misogynistic assumption about women, that if Elizabeth doesn't like Darcy, it's because Darcy doesn't like Elizabeth. That it's sour grapes. It's not born out of a genuine dislike. It's and once woman controls man, then the whole thing shifts again. I can imagine that would have been, kind of a satirical assumption about women, which she, seems to have bought into, but obviously that's not the case here so much.
Well, it seems to me Austen's way too of playing with the conventional marriage knowledge.
Yes.
Those things, that is the way it happens. Mm-hmm. And
you ensnare a man, and then
Austen seems to be, not only satirizing that in other characters, but also trying to present characters who will go against the conventions that are expected of them, not necessarily in real life, maybe they are, but in a novel.
Yeah.
Well, in the next chapter, in chapter 32, Elizabeth keeps trying to take walks and Darcy keeps popping up.
Oh, leave her alone.
She's like, I like to walk here by myself.
Alone.
And so the next day he shows up again.
I love that he even asks her in the course of their conversations, her love of solitary walks comes up in this walk that is certainly not solitary, even though she really wishes it would be. This poor woman.
Well, then the next day or another time she's out walking, and Colonel Fitzwilliams kind of runs into her, and maybe it is on purpose. Maybe Colonel Fitz heard from Darcy that she likes to walk there, so he's now making a beeline out there, because we know he's definitely interested in her.
Yeah,
even though he's not seriously interested in her, he likes hanging out with her because she's attractive and she talks well. And
I do think that it's sort of a subtle thing that maybe doesn't come across in adaptations so much, but that Darcy does go out of his way to spend time with her pre-proposal. And that, again, she's not understanding the point of all these questions, but we will come to see that, it's about things she likes, places she likes to be, her opinion of marriage, the expectation that she's going to come back to Rosings. Yes. And then Colonel Fitzwilliam, I always thought was a very interesting character, because he's sort of like, in a sense, I think another version of Wickham, like he's Wickham but good,
and not good looking,
and not good looking. Yes,
according to Elizabeth. But we had this talk last week with Lauren, and she was like, "Yeah, but could that be just her point of view?" And even if it is just her point of view, he's ineligible. Yeah. Because he's not good.
Which and she even admits that he has better, she compares him to Wickham in her head, and she said, he's not handsome, he maybe has better understanding and is a better speaker, more intelligent, but
you're 20 years old, you want him to be
disqualified from it. And also he disqualifies himself, because this is rereading it as an adult. As a youth, I was just trying to get to the proposal scene, but rereading this as an adult, I think it's an interesting discussion of the younger son syndrome that comes up quite a bit in romance novels of you are the younger son, so you don't inherit, so you have to get a profession, and also that limits who you're going to marry. And that Fitzwilliam brings this up almost pointedly, and Elizabeth is like, is he bringing this up intentionally because he thinks I like him? I don't. I gotta make sure. I mean, that they're both kind of, I feel like they have been drawn together, and to a certain extent maybe pushed together, maybe and that again, in another life that they may have been a good match, but both of them are like, yeah, but I can't marry you, you can't marry me, so we're not getting any further than this solitary walk that's not so solitary.
I think you're reading my notes. I wrote, Elizabeth thinks he's hinting, so she makes a joke. I mean, that's exactly what you just said. I
think it's a saucy series of jokes myself. I think
it's quite
forward.
And it's interesting. He can't marry where he likes, not just because he's the younger son and needs money, but he also talks about how it's a matter of rank. And he can't, that gives him responsibilities. So he also has to acquire a wife of his rank, and also hopefully with some money, because he's not rich. So that's a really limited scope. That's a really limited pool of women you could go for.
Yeah.
And
again, in comparison to Wickham, who is, come to find out, a fortune hunter.
As long as you got money, that's all Wickham cares about.
I just quite like the quip of, I suppose you would not ask above 50,000 pounds. What's the usual price for an earl's younger son? But again, I think it's very forward, but at the same time, I think Austen is very deliberately being like, yeah, hey, this is a marriage market. It's a market, and we buy and sell, and especially coming off the Collinses. Prudential matches, we've now misdirected, and that Elizabeth is very aware of that, and that's not of interest to her, which again I think is going to be very important when Darcy proposes, because obviously if she was just concerned about rank and fortune, that would be the focus. You wouldn't turn that down.
I mean, she might be joking about it with Colonel Fitzwilliam, but she recognizes that that's a real thing. But she's not going to play that game. That is not who this character is. Elizabeth is not the person who is just going to go for the money no matter what. And
deliberately saying in a lively tone, she colored it the idea basically that she's being assumed to be after Fitzwilliam, but that she's going to turn this into a bit of a joke. That again, Austen's so good psychologically that she's turning this into a defense. She's laughing at it. She's just got, again, that complexity, which I love.
She also finds two things out here. Number one, she just finds out a little bit about Colonel Fitzwilliam is also the guardian of Georgiana, Darcy's younger sister. And Elizabeth then tries to find out about her in a way that's a little, like gossipy, I want to know something about someone, and that's not actually that polite or nice of her to do, to have these kind of judgments about somebody that she has never met, and she's looking for Colonel Fitzwilliam to support those things that she got from Wickham.
And again, that she does get a response. She observed him looking at her earnestly, and the manner in which he asked her why she supposed Miss Darcy likely to give him any easiness convinced her that she had somehow or other got pretty near the truth. Again, that she...
And she hasn't at all.
No. She's reading this wrong.
She completely doesn't know what's going on.
The truth is here, and she just sort of sailed past it. I
have to just say that. This is an instance where she thinks she knows something, and she knows it from Wickham, and she's completely blown it.
Yes. And again, that she's misreading. She knows just enough to make it an issue, but not enough to actually have any true understanding of it. And she thinks she has picked up something a secret, because Fitzwilliam reacted a certain way. just as Darcy reacts certain ways, but she's misread it. That's not what's happened at all.
All right. I want to go through the second revelation quickly because
Yes.
I want to get to the next chapter.
Mhm.
And that's, she asks about, she gets information about Darcy in London and what he may have done. Fitzwilliam brings this up. He says, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him, to Darcy, in that it is a circumstance which Darcy, of course, would not wish to be generally known, because if it were get round to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing. And Darcy interfered with, he congratulated himself, Darcy did, on having lately saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, but without mentioning names or any other particulars. Now, Elizabeth knows who he's talking about.
Yeah. And I love, though, that that how Austen does that, which is she doesn't, it's not, he says this jokingly, she says this clearly upset. It's just the dialogue, without really giving too much insight into what Elizabeth is thinking or how she's responding, which I think is a great kind of open-ended trick of Austen's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing she says, your cousin's conduct does not suit my feelings. Why was he to be the judge between these two people he interfered with? And which harkens back to chapter 10, when Elizabeth is at Netherfield and they have this Bingley and Darcy and Caroline, and Elizabeth's kind of like, it's all about Darcy's influence over Bingley. And Elizabeth says, to yield readily, easily to the persuasion of a friend is no merit with you, to Darcy. And Darcy says, to yield without conviction is no compliment to the understanding of either. And Elizabeth says, you appear to me, Mr. Darcy, to allow nothing for the influence of friendship and affection. A regard for the requester would make one readily yield to the request. But it's this whole idea of,
yes, that friends and influencing friends. Yeah, which of course has now come back, ironically, to bite Elizabeth in the butt here. Yes, yeah.
So now what she realizes here is that it wasn't Caroline Bingley who separated her sister and Mr. Bingley. It was Darcy. And so now she's got a headache and she's not going to tea at Rosings.
Yeah.
And she's crying. And this is very upsetting. I mean, it's very genuine. Like her sister was, other people interfered with her sister's happiness, and it's Darcy.
Yeah. And she's trying to process the why, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
She believes that it could not possibly be down to Jane herself, because as far as Elizabeth is concerned, Jane can do no wrong. All loveliness and goodness as she is. I do love that Jane Austen wrote the most lovely and good person in the planet and named it her Jane. Yes, all loveliness and goodness as she is. Can't be anything against my father, who, though he has peculiarities, has abilities which Mr. Darcy himself need not disdain, and respectability. Again, for people that Elizabeth loves, she's extraordinarily loyal and will not hear anything bad against them. She has to admit that her mother, maybe her confidence gave way a little, but she would not allow any objections there, had any material weight with Mr. Darcy, whose pride she was convinced would receive a deeper wound from the want of importance in his friend's connection. So she's attributing this mostly to a lack of connections, even though even she has to kind of admit that her mom is a bit of a problem area there.
Well, but she's still not willing to blame her family
no
right now at this moment. So, and readers, I think, might be. And I think it's an instance where readers might think like, hey, your mom was a real, piece of work there. I mean, are you sure?
And even Charlotte had kind of noted that even Jane needs to move faster than she's moving at the moment.
Well, hold on. I need a fresh Brandy Elizabeth for.
I appreciate, this is another thing, because I think this is a great way to do it. You're upset, so you wallow. And that's exactly what she does. She's like, oh gosh, I found out this awful thing. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to think about it ad nauseum. I'm going to hype myself up. I'm going to have a headache. I'm going to exasperate myself as much as possible. I'm like, yes, lean into that.
I'm going to reread my sister's sad letters.
Yes.
That's literally what she's doing at this moment.
Read between the lines here. I'm just going to make this. This is like when you're already sad, so you listen to I don't know, Joni Mitchell or something, and drink. You wallow in it. You really sink in there.
Well, the doorbell rings and she thinks right away, is it Colonel Fitzwilliam pursuing her? And
oh no, it's worse. It's much worse.
When to her utter amazement, she saw Darcy walk into the room, and he began an inquiry after her health because he knows she's been home with a headache, so he leaves the party. And he's at the party and they're like, oh, Elizabeth is not coming because she has a headache. And he leaves them. He's like, oh, and he goes right to her.
Yeah.
Well, it's his moment. Like, she's alone. I know she's alone.
I can talk to her now.
I can go and propose. Although,
again, from the start, he makes a dog's breakfast out of it. And to be fair, how I think Austen frames this, it is as sudden to the reader as it is to Elizabeth. I mean, he's agitated, and then all of a sudden it's just, there you are. In vain I have struggled. And you're just confronted with it. And there's no kind of, even how it's framed on the page, you're just like, oh, okay, cool.
In vain I have struggled, it will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell how ardently I admire and love you. And readers, especially first-time readers, might be surprised. That's the only quote from the proposal.
Yes.
The rest of it is just 2 paragraphs of a description of how he proposes.
Yeah.
We get a narratorial summation of what he says.
We don't go back into dialogue again until they're talking to each other.
Which is fascinating, because what it does then is that we don't hear what he says. We only hear what Elizabeth thinks he says.
Yes.
And this is the thing that Austen is starting to master in this novel, and completely masters it by Emma, is this free and direct discourse we've talked about before, where it's third person omniscient, but it's not really omniscient. It's tricking you that it's omniscient. What it really is Elizabeth's point of view. It's a character's point of view. And what we hear is how she hears his proposal. Now, I'm sure he says some of these things, and of course, the way
and they make and she makes the point about how he says it too. So we are getting the. It's most important that it's her perception of this proposal, not necessarily what he says, but it's all about his pride. He was not more eloquent on the subject of tenderness than of pride. His sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation of the family obstacles, which judgment had always opposed to inclination. But built on with a warmth that seemed due to the consequence.
His proposal is, in vain I have struggled, pride, inferiority, degradation, family obstacles.
Yeah, which again, even without hearing the actual dialogue, is fairly horrifying and offensive. Yeah. So again, we're not discounting that this is a bad proposal. But yes, no, I think you're right, because if it had just been, here's exactly what he said word for word, it would have removed, again, yes, exactly, that kind of third person omniscient, but actually here's the real point. It's free and direct discourse perception.
This is what she hears come out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. And
that is pretty bad. Pretty bad.
And she understands, and I love this, that, in spite of her deeply rooted dislike, she could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection. She gets the societal class cultural thing that's going on here. He's proposing to you, and he's a big shot.
Yes. Yes. And that this is, and we should, again, acknowledge that this is a massive, that there is a reason why, as awful as it is him talking about inferiority and degradation, this is an issue. And to dismiss it as an issue is to do both of them into service, really. That this is a massive shift, that she is not necessarily on paper really suitable for this. And even then, she is sorry that she's going to cause him pain.
But she lost all compassion and anger. And then he concludes with representing to her the strength of that attachment, which in spite of all his endeavors, he had found impossible to conquer, and with expressing his hope that it would now be rewarded by the acceptance of her hand. Now that's,
I'm sure he thought this was it. If I just show all the obstacles I overcame, then surely that will just prove how much I love you.
And that's where I can kind of really read her and him, what he's saying. Like, I'm sure he said something like that this character would have almost exactly said about the, impossible to conquer his feelings. But I wonder if he really said the words, I will be rewarded by the acceptance of her hand. That's what she hears. But I wonder if that's something that would have come out of his mouth. That's clearly something that comes out of the mouth of like Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Well, not even that. He's like, of course you'll marry me.
Yeah. But I do think, again, we're really going back to the Mr. Collins thing. And in terms of the comparison of which is the worst thing, obviously Mr. Collins explicitly basically says, even when Elizabeth says no, he's like, oh yeah, but elegant females, obviously you don't mean no.
You mean yes.
That he didn't speak, he spoke of apprehension and anxiety, but his countenance expressed real security. That she could easily see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. Yeah. And again, that Elizabeth's not without her pride too. This is very annoying, a confident, suitor in this instance, that the words are not, as far as she's concerned, the words are not matching the presentation, what he is visually projecting.
She has, I love this, but now she's gonna give her response, and she's angry and everything.
And there's more where that came from.
I love this there's like a whole paragraph in such cases as this, and we have a whole paragraph of response, but basically her response is, you'll get over it.
Yep.
No, you'll get over it.
I never wanted your good opinion, and you have bestowed it most unwillingly. You'll be fine.
And he seemed to catch at her words with no less resentment than surprise. His complexion became pale with anger. And
this is interesting too, again, because we've talked about, he has talked about anger too, and his resentments, and that has been characterized problematically by Elizabeth and by Darcy, again, as anger, rather than kind of a more rational response. So that he's angry about this is interesting, but he is, it does force him again to, instead of doing his pre-rehearsed in front of the mirror speech,
now he's got to
talk to her, answer her. Yeah.
He thinks he's doing the right thing though here. He thinks, I love her, but of course, there's no way these two people should get married. But because I love her, I'm going to propose anyway.
And I'm going to be brutally honest about it.
Aren't I so great? I so great? Because I'm I'm offering myself to someone who clearly is not deserving of me. Saying.
And I'm not even going to attempt to hide what I really feel about. I'm so honest. Isn't that lovely of me to be so honest as to be really actually insulting?
And then she lays into him.
Yes.
And the whole, then she gives him, she tells him exactly what he's, done wrong.
And I think again, important to this, which is he obviously there are points where he is saying, I'm not guilty here, but that after she throws that, I might as well inquire why it was so evident a design of offending and insulting me. You chose to tell me you liked me against your will. That. And then she goes into obviously Jane, but that he changes color.
Yeah. He's not expecting to be accused of preventing Jane. That's the furthest thing from his mind.
But also, I don't think he thinks he's going to be accused of offending and insulting her either.
Yeah,
I think that's really the key here. He obviously doesn't feel guilty about Jane. He obviously doesn't feel guilty about Wickham, but the proposal is offensive. And later she will say, this is not gentlemanly. And I think that's really what gets him. Yes. Yeah. Which is that this is not how you approach another human being, by offending and insulting them and then expecting them to be grateful that you asked them to marry you.
He really was expecting, like, in his mind, everything was different. And then he's faced with someone who's going to tell her truth to him. And he can't believe, it's all crumbled away because he hasn't behaved well, which is our first, you're uncivil, like you like me against your will. Really? That's your way of proposing? Mm-hmm. And then it's Jane bad. Really, throws him, and he, she's cruel. Yeah. Yeah.
I
have every reason. Read that little paragraph. Then she's
yes. I have every reason.
We could say that she's justified in being cruel, but I think it is still cruel. Go ahead.
Yeah. I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. No motive can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part you acted there. You dare not, you cannot deny that you have been the principal, if not the only means of dividing them from each other, of exposing one to the censure of the world for caprice and instability, and the other to its derision for disappointed hopes, and involving them both in misery of the acutest kind.
That's about Jane. I'm sorry. There's a crueler bit later when she.
But again, I mean, she's really accusing him of being unjust and ungenerous, and that's harsh.
And this is where he's still thinking something different. Like, he can't believe she's bringing up Jane and Bingley, and he says he even looked at her with a smile
of affected incredulity. Yeah,
like he's like, and this though is confirming for him why he shouldn't have proposed her to begin.
Yeah, I think that line, towards him I have been kinder than towards myself.
Yeah,
that's cruel too to both of them.
Oh yeah.
Really, that's a massive.
That's his respect. You're going to be mean. I'm going to be mean back, and I have been kinder than him, Bingley, than I was to myself, and it's just. But that's like, he feels justified in this at this moment.
But again, this entire chapter is drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Each insult that they throw at each other rebounds quite badly, I think.
And now she brings up Wickham, and it's like. What? He's got to be thinking, like, what are you talking about? I'm coming here to propose.
You're coming at me with so many things here.
And she's talking about Wickham.
Decide what you're mad at me about. Please settle on one thing.
And he can't tell her what happened. And we're not going to talk about what happened, why he's so angry at Wickham. That's in the letter that he sends to her in our next episode.
Although, again, I do think this is an interesting moment because it will, again, obviously, without jumping too far ahead, come back to haunt him. But it's a problem with Darcy as a character. It's a great part about Darcy as a character, but he just really does assume that how he perceives reality is how reality is, and he doesn't seem to take into account that there's, again, that world of gossip, that world of perception. He hasn't told anyone about Wickham.
Yeah.
And he can't reasonably expect anyone to agree with him and disagree with Wickham when he won't share that information. And again, not to spoil anything, but that becomes a massive issue, this reticence.
Yeah.
And it certainly is an issue.
What people don't talk about and they should have talked about. We'll come back to her more than just the people who chose not to talk about it.
Yeah. And I mean, she accuses it as a she accuses him of misrepresentation. Under what misrepresentation can you impose upon others? And again, obviously Wickham's the one who's misrepresenting, but Darcy is not fixing that. And that's just because, again, he is not someone who tries to speak to other people. Now it has really serious real world consequences.
Yeah.
And yes, it must be extraordinarily anger inducing and frustrating And yeah, cruel on Elizabeth's side, but also Darcy, this realization that, shoot, everyone thinks this thing, this is your opinion of me. This, okay, well, I was, again, in Acapulco in my head on our honeymoon, and that's obviously not where you were.
And he's also mean too, like, and he says, had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession. And she's like, your honest confession sucked, dude. I mean,
and I hate that kind of like, I'm so honest.
I was being honest, and you're now being mean to me.
Insulting.
Like, so, but this has really hit him hard.
Yes.
Now he's thinking like, she thinks that I did that thing to Wickham, like what Wickham is like. I went behind the scenes and took away his living and really hurt him. And this is what really hurts him. And
he even says, disguise of every sort is my abhorrence. In leaning back into the honesty bit, again, you do just get this sense of a man who is just like, but I've never lied. So why does everyone think I'm this other person?
And then she lays into him. You behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner.
Yeah.
She saw him start at this, but he said nothing. And then she really lays in, right?
Yeah.
This is when she's really cruel and really lays in. But she's on, like, dude, you talking to me about being honest?
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Fine.
Now I'm going to be honest.
Where that came from. Yeah. You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that could have tempted me to accept it.
And then from the very beginning.
That again, his astonishment was obvious, and he looked at her with an expression of mingled incredulity and mortification. She went on, from the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feelings of others, were such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike. I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed upon to marry.
Oh, she nails him.
Yeah. And even then he's like, oh, stop, I'm already dead. Please stop.
She's like, this is how you've behaved.
Yeah.
And
whatever else you think you've represented yourself as, what you have come across as is arrogance, conceit, and selfish disdain. And I think the man crumbles. Absolutely.
You have spent quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings and have now only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness. I mean, he's like, I'm just going to give you a polite response and get the hell out of here. Like, he got,
because my entire psyche has now shattered, and I gotta go pick it up.
And her though, she doesn't know yet. Like she can't read what he's really thinking and for her it's just at the end of this one paragraph here, but his pride, his abominable pride, his shameless avowal of what he had done with respect to Jane, his unpardonable assurance in acknowledging that he could not justify it, and the unfeeling manner which he had mentioned Mr. Wickham, his cruelty towards whom he had not attempted to deny, soon overcame the pity which the consideration of his attachment had for a moment excited. I mean, she still just thinks he's just being a proud jerk.
Yeah. Although, again, I think it's interesting. Obviously, we've had Collins. We've also had Wickham, who has now faded significantly from her mind as a suitor. And we've had Fitzwilliam, who, again, she dismissed. That up to this point, every potential male in her life, she's emotionally removed them from herself quite easily. That she's still in a tumult now is suggestive. And again, I think indicative of that this is the exception now, because she's more emotionally invested than she has been in any of the other men and any of the other awful proposals. So, yeah.
Well,
so you think this is the worst?
I've talked about Wickham's or Collins's proposal.
Yeah.
Now we have this one. Somebody in the chat pointed out early on that, that they didn't think, they thought Collins was still worse. And then somebody said, well, you know what's really worse? St. John Rivers and Jane Eyre. Yeah, St. John Rivers and Jane Eyre is the worst proposal.
Let's mortify our bodies, join in our souls. Oh,
but for
God,
these two, for Mr. Collins and Darcy, I think Darcy's is worse if both of them are selfish. Both of them come in thinking, this is what I think, and here it is. This one's worse because of the insult that he gives her. For me, it's worse. It's that you're beneath me and I'm going to propose to you even though I still want to marry you. And that for me is worse than Mr. Collins saying, I can give you a great living. Of course you're going to marry me because I'm going to give you this great living. And
I mean,
it's just that little bit.
Obviously the Mr. Collins one drives me crazy because of, I think, the implicit misogyny of elegant females and, oh, you're saying no, but I know that you're going to say yes if I just propose a second time, and you know, and obviously, but Mr. Collins is ridiculous. He's a comedic character. The threat is not there. This is, I can buy that this is the worst proposal because it's very again, damaging on both sides. And
if you're selfish and you don't feel for somebody, say whatever you're going to say, as Mr. Collins does. But if you do feel for somebody, that should have led you to not being as selfish as Darcy is.
Yes.
And he's still selfish, even though he thinks that he's in love with her. He is in love with her.
And that Darcy is cruel in that, and that Elizabeth then also, again, acts with cruelty. That they push each other and really, in this minute, bring out the worst in each other. It's an interesting, I mean, I think it's the better proposal long term, obviously, because the difference between Mr. Collins and Mr. Darcy is Mr. Darcy does hear her in the end. Collins does not. Collins is still in his own, you know, like, oh, well, this, that. He doesn't listen to Elizabeth. And that's part of the joke of that entire thing is she keeps saying, no, I mean it. I mean it this time. And he's elegant females. And then he moves on. But in this, Darcy is shook. He is, and he hears her and he gets it, not immediately, and she doesn't get it immediately. But again, it's that key thing about Elizabeth and Darcy. They are on the same wavelength, even when they don't think they are. They are communicating with each other in a world where everyone talks at cross purposes. They do get it eventually, and it's painful, but they're going to grow from it. So obviously it is going to be painful, but it's the worst before it gets better. This is pretty bad. This is very bad. This is, you know, there are parts about your personality that I don't like. And you have come at this from such a bad angle that it has brought out the worst in me, but eventually it will bring out the best. We hope, obviously, no spoilers.
This novel is just so great in that it's, you know, it comes out like in the first sentence of the novel, it comes out like this is going to be a marriage novel, maybe in a little bit of a satirical way, but it's like, you know, the first proposal is just ridiculous, and then the next marriage expected like gets broken up, and then the marriage that happens is like with the ridiculous character. And now the guy who's most eligible is like gives this horrible proposal. Like, what is going on?
But that it is complicated. Again, she's such a, you know, it's I think romance novels and certainly there's that I think very incorrect assumption about Austen that it's it's a marriage thing, you know. It's just, but these are adult relationships and they're complex. And they are not going to come together without, you know, you kind of maybe disliking parts of these characters and these characters having to change. And no, this is the worst proposal because I do think it comes from a bad place.
He should know better.
He really should. I mean, don't use the word degradation. Here's a clue. Here's a hint, kids. When you're proposing, don't talk about inferiority and degradation. That's usually a no.
That's yeah.
Again, romance is dead.
Yeah. Family obstacles, okay, that's gonna happen. Your family's not the same as mine, but inferiority, degradation, yeah, that's
yeah. No.
Well,
and her response too, though, again, that she just unearth all these things and flings them at. Again, all this stuff boiling under the surface. Now it's on the surface. Now we got to confront it, which is great. Let's do that.
Well, Janeite, thank you for tuning in today. I think that's where we'll leave it for this episode.
Just riled up.
Yeah, well, now we're all right. That's why
in desperate need of chocolate.
It is like just a relaxing kind of. A couple people said that like they were gonna like do different kinds of hot chocolates, like add different things to them. That's what you need after this chapter.
Yes, this is hot chocolate with s'mores Baileys in it. That's what I'm doing tonight. So yes, that's needed. Very needed.
Yeah. I'm basically drinking brandy and chocolate. So
best.
But I never get too upset because I have the pipe. The pipe is it's me like going into my serene place with tobacco.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As the holidays commence, we all go into the serene place of beating each other up during proposals.
All righty. Well, also thanks to our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. And as we end the first half of Austen Mondays, I want to thank all of you who have donated over the last few months. Your support helps us bring this show to everyone, create other one-of-a-kind programs and courses, and helps us care for the collections we have at the Rosenbach, including our Jane Austen first editions. Many of you have also joined the Rosenbach as members. Rosenbach membership gives you free museum admission, discounts and programs and courses, exclusive invitations to members-only events. It really is true that this show wouldn't exist without the support that you've all given us over the first half. And so much of what we do is dependent upon the donation and memberships of our audience. This Austen Mondays audience has been tremendously generous. And if you'd like to make one more donation before the year ends, or join the Rosenbach, and memberships also make a great gift too, I would be so ever grateful. Thank you so much. Remember, we also have an Austen Mondays Facebook group where we can continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. But on this video that you're watching right now on our YouTube channel, like the Austen Monday videos, subscribe to the channel, leave comments there as well. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat Mrs. Reynolds, for managing our links in the chat tonight. Thanks to Elizabeth Steele for taking a turn about the room with us today. That was very delightful. We'll be off next week. Our next episode will be January 2nd on episode 13. And our guest will be Juliet Wells, Goucher professor and author of Austen books. And Casey McMillan will join me as co-host for chapters 35 to 38. Darcy writes, Lizzy reflects. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'll be seeing you soon. Thanks to Tucker Christine, who wrote our opening and closing credits music. Thanks to my daughter, Lulu, who's going to go to Princeton, who shot and created the credits with me. Farewell, readers. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness. Bye-bye.